The night my stepfather moved my bedroom to the basement, he called it a privilege. He said it with the particular calm of someone who had rehearsed the sentence. Your own space, he said. Privacy. Most kids your age would be grateful. My mother was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, holding a dish towel, and she nodded the way she had started nodding at everything he said. Not quickly, not eagerly, but with the slow, deliberate movement of someone who had decided that agreement was easier than the alternative. I was 13. I carried my own boxes down the stairs. His name was Terrence. He had moved in 8 months before that after dating my mother for what felt to me like a very short time, but which she described, when her friends asked, as a year and a half of taking things slowly. He was 41, owned a landscaping company, and had a way of speaking to my mother that made everything sound reasonable even when nothing about it was. He called her sweetheart and remembered the names of her coworkers and learned which shelf she kept her tea on. He was, by every visible measure, a good man. He did not like me. Not in any way, he said out loud. He never raised his voice at me. He never touched me in anger. What he did was quieter than that and in some ways more precise. He noticed things about me the way a person notices problems, the way I left dishes on the counter, the way I sometimes forgot to close cabinet doors all the way, the way I answered questions with questions, which he called disrespectful, though I had never meant it that way. He brought these things to my mother one at a time, gently, in the evenings after I had gone upstairs, and I know this because I sat at the top of the stairs and listened, and I heard her voice change as the months went on, from defending me to explaining me to, eventually, apologizing for me. I don't think she meant for it to go the way it did. I want to say that first. I think she loved me. I think she also loved the version of her life he was offering her, and I think when those two things started pulling in different directions, she had already practiced, for long enough, the habit of choosing him. My father lived 4 hours away in Knoxville. He and my mother had divorced when I was 7, and he called on birthdays and most Sundays, and I spent summers with him until I was 11, and then he remarried a woman named Deborah who had 2 daughters of her own, and somehow after that the summers got shorter and the Sunday calls started going to voicemail more often than not. I don't say this to be unfair to him. I say it because it matters to the shape of what came next. By the time I was 13, I had quietly stopped expecting him to be someone I could call in a crisis. I did not make this decision in any dramatic way. I simply noticed that the line between us had grown thin from disuse, and I adjusted accordingly. So when things started getting worse, I did not call my father. I did what I had been doing since I was small. I got very quiet and I paid attention. The basement was finished, which I think was supposed to make it acceptable. There was carpet, a window that looked out at ground level at the side yard, a half bath with a shower that had low water pressure. Terrence installed a lock on the door from the inside, which my mother pointed to as evidence that my privacy was being respected. The lock was real. I use it. That part was not a lie. What they did not mention was that the door at the top of the stairs could also be locked from the outside. I noticed this on the 3rd night. I had come upstairs for a glass of water around 11 and found the door latched. Not locked, exactly. There was no key mechanism, but there was a sliding bolt on the hallway side. The kind that takes 2 seconds to slide and that a person could forget was there, the way you forget a lot of things that are convenient to forget. I stood at the top of the stairs for a moment in the dark, and then I went back down and drank water from the bathroom tap, and lay on my bed and looked at the ceiling. I did not say anything the next morning. I had been learning for 8 months that the things I said came back to me altered, smoothed over, and reframed until they no longer resembled what I had said. Until I myself could not be entirely sure what I had meant. I had started keeping a notebook for this reason. Not a diary. I was not sentimental about it. I wrote dates, times, what was said, what happened. I wrote it in the same flat tone you use to copy notes from a board. I hid it inside the cover of a textbook I knew no one would open. School had become complicated. I was in 8th grade. I had been a decent student. Not exceptional, not a problem. The kind of student teachers remember only if they stop to think about it. In the fall of that year, I started arriving tired. I was not sleeping well in the basement. The water heater was adjacent to my room and cycled on at 2 and 4 in the morning, and the sound was not loud, but it was consistent, and after a while, consistent sounds can take up more space than loud ones. I fell asleep twice in first period. My English teacher, Mr. Okafor, asked me once, quietly after class, if everything was okay at home. I said yes. He looked at me for a moment with the expression of someone deciding whether to push on a door, and then he said, "All right, let me know if you need anything," and I said I would. And I left. I think about that moment a lot now. Not with blame? He asked. I lied. These things happen in a particular sequence for a reason. The thing that changed was not dramatic. It rarely is. In January, about 5 months after I moved to the basement, my grandmother came to visit. Her name is Cecily and she lives in Asheville, and she drives a 10-year-old Subaru and keeps hard candy in the center console and has opinions about everything, which she delivers without much ceremony. She is my father's mother, technically, which made the relationship between her and my mother slightly complicated even before Terrence. But she and I had always been close in the uncomplicated way that sometimes happens between grandparents and grandchildren when neither party is performing anything. She arrived on a Friday afternoon. I was home from school. Terrence was at work. My mother greeted her in the driveway with the careful warmth of someone managing an inspection. When my grandmother came inside and I showed her my room, or tried to, when I opened the door to the basement stairs, she stopped. "Where do you sleep?" she said. Not a question, exactly. More like a clarification she was requesting before she decided something. "Down here," I said. She went on the stairs and stood in the middle of my room and looked at the window and the carpet and the water heater and the low ceiling. She did not say anything for a long time. Later that night, after dinner, when my mother and Terrence were watching something in the living room, my grandmother came and sat on the edge of my bed and asked me to tell her what had been happening. Not what was fine. What had been happening. I told her some of it, not all of it. The part about the bolt on the door I told her. The part about the food I told her. There had been a period in November and December where I was eating less than I should have been. Not because food was withheld exactly, but because dinner was served at a time I was often still doing homework. And by the time I came up, the kitchen had been cleaned and my mother said I should have managed my time better. And there was never anything kept out for me. And I had learned to keep crackers and peanut butter in my room the way you keep a flashlight somewhere you might need it in the dark. My grandmother listened to all of this without interrupting, which was not entirely like her, and when I finished, she put her hand over mine on the blanket. She left Sunday morning. Before she left, she hugged me for longer than usual, and she said quietly into the side of my head, "I'm going to take care of this. Don't do anything. Just keep writing things down." I did not know what she meant by take care of this. I found out 6 weeks later. In between, things escalated in the way that things escalate when someone has decided on a direction and is no longer being careful about disguising it. In February, my mother called me into the living room and told me that she and Terrence had decided I would be transferring to Birchwood Academy, a private school 40 minutes away, starting in the fall. Terrence sat beside her on the couch with the expression of someone presenting a gift. He said it was an opportunity. He said the academics were rigorous. He said he had already spoken with the admissions office. I asked if I could stay at my current school. My mother said the decision had been made. I asked why. Terrence said calmly that my current environment was not helping me thrive. I went downstairs and opened my notebook and wrote down the date and what had been said and the word "thrive" in quotation marks. The following week, I was told my phone would be kept on the kitchen counter overnight for my own well-being, something about sleep hygiene and screen time. This was framed as a household policy. It applied, as far as I could tell, only to me. I started coming upstairs at 6 in the morning before either of them was awake to check my messages. I called my grandmother from the school library on Tuesdays and Thursdays during free period. She was moving carefully. She had spoken to a family attorney. She had spoken to my father, which surprised me, and which she said had been a difficult conversation but a necessary one. She told me to keep documenting. She told me if anything happened that felt unsafe to go to a neighbor or a teacher immediately and use the word "unsafe" out loud. I went home that afternoon and I thought about the bolt on the door. That night, I propped a chair under the handle of the basement door from the inside, not because I was afraid of what would happen, because I needed to feel like I had done something with my hands. March was the month everything became visible. My school counselor, a woman named Ms. Peretz who wore the same 3 cardigans in rotation and kept a bowl of butterscotch on her desk, called me in for what she described as a routine check-in. Someone had flagged my attendance. I had missed 9 days since October. Most of them days I had been too tired to function and had told my mother I was sick, and she had, without taking my temperature, called the school. Miss Peretz asked how I was sleeping. I said not great. She asked if anything was different at home. I looked at the butterscotch bowl for a moment and then I looked at her and I said, I have been keeping a record. Would that be useful to someone? She leaned forward very slightly. Her voice did not change. She said, yes. I brought her the notebook the next day. She made photocopies and gave it back to me without reading from it in front of me, which I appreciated. She said she was going to make some calls. She said these things sometimes move slowly and I should not be alarmed if nothing seemed to happen right away. She said, you did the right thing bringing this. I had not cried since October. I did not cry then. But I walked back to class and sat down and something in my chest shifted slightly. Some weight redistributed itself and I got through the rest of the day without thinking about the basement once. My grandmother arrived on a Thursday. She had driven the whole way from Asheville, 6 hours, and she did not call ahead. She knocked on the front door at 4:15 in the afternoon. I was home. My mother was home. Terence was not yet back from work. I heard the knock, and then I heard my mother's voice go through 3 distinct registers: surprised, cautious, controlled, and then the door opened wider and my grandmother walked in without being invited, which was, I would learn later, something her attorney had advised her she could do given what she had filed. She came downstairs and found me in my room, and she sat on the edge of my bed and held my face in both her hands and looked at me for a long moment and said, I've got you. I believed her. That is not a thing I say lightly. I had been practicing not believing things for a long time. The caseworker arrived within the hour. Her name was Miss Treadwell, and she had the measured, unhurried manner of someone who has walked into difficult houses before and knows the value of not moving too quickly. She went through every room. She came downstairs and looked at the window, the bathroom, the water heater. She looked at the bolt at the top of the stairs for a long time without touching it. She asked me to show her the notebook. I gave her the copy I had made at the school library, every page, every date. She read it quietly. When she finished, she said, This is very thorough. This matters. I said I know. Upstairs, my mother was sitting at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the surface, very still. My grandmother was at the far end of the counter. Neither of them was speaking. Terence had arrived home at some point during all of this, and was standing near the sliding door to the backyard in the way that I'd seen my mother stand in doorways. Nearby, adjacent, not quite claiming the room, Ms. Treadwell spoke to both of them. I was not present for all of it. What I know is that when she was done, she came back downstairs and told me that I would be going with my grandmother that evening. She said my mother would be given information about next steps. She said the bolt on the door and the pattern of documentation had raised concerns that would require formal follow-up. I packed a bag, not the whole room. A week's worth of clothes, my notebook, the worn paperback I had been rereading for comfort, a photograph from when I was 9 that I kept in the back of my desk drawer because it was from before, and before had started to feel like a different country. My mother was still at the kitchen table when I came upstairs with my bag. She looked at it and then at me, and for a moment I thought she might say something that would change something. She said, You didn't have to do this. I thought about the bolt. I thought about November dinners. I thought about the word thrive delivered with a straight face on a Tuesday evening. I said, I know. I did it anyway. My grandmother's car smelled like peppermint and the heater ran a little loud, and there was a crack in the passenger seat leather that I had forgotten about and remembered the moment I sat down. We drove through Charlotte in the early dark, and she didn't ask me to talk, and I didn't. And somewhere past the city limits, I put my head against the window and closed my eyes. The legal process was not fast. I want to say that plainly because stories have a tendency to compress the slow parts. It was 6 months of hearings, evaluations, a guardian ad litem who asked me many of the same questions in slightly different orders to see if my answers changed. They didn't. And a family court process that my grandmother's attorney navigated with patience I could not always match. My father drove up for 3 of the hearings. He sat beside my grandmother in the gallery, and he looked older than I remembered, and he said, at one point in the hallway outside the courtroom, that he was sorry it had taken him this long to show up. I did not say it was okay, because it wasn't. I said, "You're here now." He nodded. We are not close in the way we once were, but we are in contact, which is more than I had let myself want. Terrence was investigated separately. It came out during the process that he had a previous domestic matter in another county. Nothing charged, nothing proven, but documented in the way that things are documented when someone has thought to write things down. His attorney argued that my time in the basement was a parenting decision made in good faith. The family court judge, a woman named Honorable Patricia Dowd, who read from her findings in a voice that gave no indication of what she was about to say until she was saying it, found this argument unpersuasive. She used the word systematic in her ruling. She used the phrase pattern of isolation. She terminated Terrence's step-parent relationship and issued a no-contact order. My mother retained partial rights with conditions, mandatory counseling, supervised visits, a review hearing in 12 months. I was placed permanently with my grandmother. I have lived in Asheville for 4 years now. Her house is small and sits on a street with large oaks that drop leaves from September through November, and she never rakes until December, which bothered me at first and then became something I looked forward to without understanding why. She makes coffee too strong and keeps the television on in the evenings at a volume that fills the house without demanding attention, and she has a dog named something I can only describe as an ongoing argument between what a name should mean and what her dog actually is. We eat dinner at the table. She asks follow-up questions. She has come to every school event I have had in 4 years, including a junior year presentation on the Clean Water Act that was attended by approximately 8 people total, and she sat in the second row and took a photograph. I'm 27 now. I went to college on a partial merit scholarship, and I'm finishing a paralegal certification, which surprises no one who knew me at 13 and my notebook. I have a studio apartment with good natural light and a lock I chose myself. My mother and I speak occasionally. The calls are careful and short and do not yet feel entirely natural, but they are calls, which is more than I knew how to want for a long time. She ended things with Terrence 18 months after the court order. She told me this on the phone, without context, as though the sentence were self-explanatory, and maybe by then it was. She said she had been in therapy. She said she had understood, now, the difference between being persuaded of something and knowing something to be true. I listened. I did not offer her absolution because I don't think that is mine to give. I did say that I heard her. There is a thing that happens when you grow up learning to make yourself small, when you learn early that your presence is an inconvenience, that your needs are negotiable, that the safest version of yourself is the one that requires the least. You get very good at it. And then one day someone asks you what you want, and you realize you have been so well trained to redirect the question that you have nearly forgotten you are allowed to answer it. My grandmother asked me that question the second week I lived with her. We were eating breakfast. She said, "What do you want to do today?" Just today. Nothing big. I sat with it for longer than she probably expected. I said, "I want to go somewhere I haven't been before." She pushed back her chair and picked up her keys. Have you ever been told, in small daily ways, that your comfort was the least important thing in a room? That your silence was a kindness you were expected to offer? I want to ask you what you did with that, because some of us learned late and at real cost that shrinking doesn't protect you. It only makes you easier to overlook. The people who needed my silence were protecting themselves, not me. It took me years to understand the difference, but I got there. And I kept the notebook. I've thought a lot about the word privilege since I was 13. The way Terrence used it, calm, unbothered, with just enough warmth to make you question your own reaction, taught me something I didn't have language for at the time. It taught me that cruelty doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it arrives with a reasonable tone of voice and a freshly installed interior lock, and it asks you to say thank you. What happened to me was not an accident, and it was not bad luck. It was a series of choices made by people who understood, on some level, that the quieter they kept me, the longer everything could continue. Terrence moved me to the basement, not because the room was better, but because distance is easier to manage than proximity. My mother agreed not because she didn't love me, but because she had spent enough months choosing agreement over friction that she had lost the habit of doing the harder thing. These things don't happen all at once. They happen in the same way a door gets harder to open over time, gradually, in ways you can explain away, until one day it doesn't open at all. What saved me was not a single dramatic moment. It was the accumulation of small acts of paying attention, writing things down when I had no one to tell them to, answering honestly when Miss Peretz asked a question that most people ask without expecting a real answer, calling my grandmother from a school library on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons because she was the one person I trusted to do something with what I told her. None of these things felt heroic at the time. They felt like survival. But I understand now that survival, done deliberately and with clear eyes, is its own kind of intelligence. You don't have to know you're being brave to be doing something brave. My grandmother Cecily drove 6 hours without calling ahead because she had looked at a basement window and a sliding bolt and made a decision. She did not wring her hands or wait to see how things developed. She acted, and then she kept acting, methodically, through attorneys and hearings and a family court process that took 6 months and demanded more patience than I knew I had. What she modeled for me was something I am still learning to apply to my own life, that caring about someone is not only a feeling, it is a sequence of actions you take even when the actions are inconvenient, even when they cost you something, even when the outcome is not guaranteed. I am 27 now. I chose a paralegal path in part because of a notebook I kept at 13, and in part because I learned early what it means to have your words doubted, and what it means, finally, to have them believed. I know the weight of documentation. I know what it costs to speak up in a room where the default assumption runs against you, and I know that the version of me who sat at the top of the basement stairs in the dark and went back down without saying anything, she was not weak, she was calculating. She was waiting until she had enough. The people who need your silence are never protecting you. They're protecting themselves. And the moment you understand that distinction, you stop being as useful to them as you once were. That is not a comfortable thing to become, but it is an honest one. Keep writing things down. Someone, someday, will ask if you have anything you'd like to show them. Have it ready.